When you have any sort of wealth within this world, regardless of if you're a rich man or if you're a poor man, you always ensure that every single penny that you have, you know where it's going to go after you. The rich man will ensure that that Barclays Bank assets will go to his wife, the NatWest one will go to his son, and so forth. Equally, the poor man will know that his blanket that he has will go to his wife, the little food that he has will go to his young son. Now in this world we also know that if there's one asset that we can hold that applies for this world and the next, it's going to be the deen and the faith that we have. Therefore I ask each and every one of you here today, if the man who brought down this faith and this deen were to be someone who did not even know that after him he would have to leave this faith and deen to someone, then what kind of man are we comparing him to? This man was none other than Nabiullah Muhammad, who knew exactly after when he passed away what was going to happen. Thus he took to the stage in the Ghadeer and told us exactly what was going to happen. And inshallah, what I just wish to do is briefly run through the events of Ghadeer for our youngsters that are here today that may not know the story in full, inshallah. So salli ala Muhammadin wa ala Muhammad. It was 10 years after the migration when the time of Hajj had come along. The time of Hajj had come along, and it said that there were between 100 to 120,000 Muslims that had embarked on the pilgrimage. Reports actually tell us that this was one moment in history at that time whereby there was the most amount of Muslims within one area under their one leader. Now we think 100,000, 120,000, perhaps not the greatest number compared to what we see today. But let's think back. Back then there was no cars, back then there were no buses, no planes and so forth, and only a certain special guest got to ride on Buraq. Thus, when we look at that number of 100 and 120,000, we truly see the magnificence of this. And it was on the way home on the 18th of Dhul Hajj, we're approaching the area known as Ghadeer, where the Holy Prophet of Islam had all of the people gathered. This was an area whereby the various Hujjaj would then tell their farewell salams to their dear brothers and sisters, for this was a time where they would go home in their own directions. It was almost like a common junction. And it was at this point where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala revealed to our Holy Prophet from Surah Al-Ma'idah verse 67, Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim, Ya ayyuhar Rasool, بلغ ما أنزل إليك من ربك وإن لم تفعل فما بلغت الرسالة والله يعصمك من الناس إن الله لا يهدي القوم الكافرين. Where he says, O messenger, announce that which has been revealed unto you from your Lord. And if you do not, then you have not conveyed the message. And Allah will protect you from those people. Indeed, Allah does not guide the disbelieving people. So what we see from this verse is that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala himself has given a message to our dear Prophet to hand out. The wilayah of Amir al-Mu'mineen that was announced did not come from the Prophet, it came from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala elected the leader that he wished to come after the Holy Prophet, as we see in this verse. But it interestingly says that Allah will protect you from the people. Which people? Of course, we now look to today and we understand the exact people that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala was referring to. Back then, you can imagine the reaction of those who, if the Prophet said there will be some that will disobey my command, what the reaction would be. However, unfortunately, this was then the case. So the Holy Prophet of Islam, of course, obeyed this command, and it was around the time of noon, and obviously we all know the heat that would go around in the time of Arabia at this time, and the Holy Prophet had sent messengers to those who had already gone beyond the land of Ghadeer to bring them back, and equally awaited for the Hujjaj to join him. And once the entire nation was there for 100 to 120,000, one of the companions created a mimbar like no other. It was made out of camel saddles. Why? so then no one would be able to leave during the sermon, highlighting the importance of this sermon. And equally, we also find that the Holy Prophet ensured that everyone could see him and a certain man to his side. It's said that the speech lasted almost 3 hours itself. 3 hours. You guys are sick of me talking after 10 minutes. 3 hours this talk lasted, of which it said over 100 verses of Quran the Holy Prophet read out. Something for us to reflect upon, whether we know the Quran well enough to bring it out in our daily speech. 100 verses of Quran, and also the Holy Prophet reminded the believers 73 times about their deeds and the future. 73 times he reminded them. He continued, and he said, and I quote from this famous sermon, "It seems the time has approached where I shall be called away by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and I shall answer that call," of course referring to his death. And he says, "I am leaving for you 2 precious things. And if you adhere to them both," keyword both, "you will never go astray after me. And they are the book of Allah, Kitab Allah, wa itrati Ahlul Bayt, and my holy family. And these 2 shall never separate from each other until they come to me by the pool of Kawthar in paradise." He continued, and as any public speaker would do, he made a rhetorical question to the crowd, and he said to them, "Do I not have more rights over the believers than what they have over themselves?" To which of course they all replied, "Of course, yes, Rasulullah." And thereafter he then held the hand up, the right hand of Mawla Ali alayhi salam, and he said, "Man kuntu Mawla fa Aliyun Mawla, Allahumma wali man wala wa adi man ada," meaning whoever I am master to, Ali ibn Abi Talib is now your master, and oh God, love those who love him and despise those who despise him. Now some bring to the table, well, this word Mawla, what does it really mean? Different connotation. I don't want to go into that. You're all Arab, you know the Arabic better than I do. But just think of it logistically. Would a man who had the perfect akhlaq waste the time of 100 to 120,000 people in the scorching heat of Arabia just to say, "Ya ayyuhal mu'mineen, I have a new friend"? It's nonsensical. So of course when the Holy Prophet used this word Mawla, he was referring to none other than master and my successor, Ali ibn Abi Talib alayhi salam. Sallallahu ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. Despite this, people still didn't believe. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, with his infinite knowledge, knew this was going to happen. Thus, he revealed another verse from Surah Al-Ma'idah, parts of a verse, and this is from verse number 3, where he says, Al-Yawm akmaltu lakum deenakum wa atmamtu alaykum ni'mati wa raditu lakum al-Islam deena, saying, "This day I have perfected for you your religion. I have perfected for you your religion and completed my favor upon you and have approved for you Islam as a religion." Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is telling us here that before the actual wilayah was announced, that the religion of Islam was not even complete. It was only at the time where the wilayah of Ali ibn Abi Talib was announced, that's when the deen was completely perfected. Thereafter, the Holy Prophet asked everyone to pay their allegiance, their bay'ah to Imam Ali alayhi salam, of which there were a certain 3 notable characters who also did this. Quite ironically also did this, and one of them, known as the first Khulafa, we shan't mention his name, he said, "Well done, Ali ibn Abi Talib. Today you have become the leader of all the believing men and women." Yet just a few weeks later, we knew what he was doing in the time of Saqifa. And if any of those people come to us and say to us, "Where is this reference?" just tell them Musnad, Tafsir, Mishkat, Habib. The list goes on and on. Each of these details is in their own books. Thus, I wish to end on one point before we call up our dear next guest, And this is a certain hadith narrated from our Holy Prophet to also highlight the wilayah. For if we look at the hadith from our Holy Prophet, we'll understand that even if he did not announce the successorship to Ali ibn Abi Talib, we could ascertain who would then be the then leader for the way that he spoke about this incredible individual. For he says, Inna aliyan wa shi'atuhu hum al-faizuna yawm al-qiyamah. That verily Ali and his followers will be the victorious ones on the day of judgment.